Donald Trump, in his second incarnation, in his return as president, is attempting to redraw not merely trade routes but geography itself, and possibly reality along with it. With his new Liberation Day tariffs and his escalating ambition to acquire Greenland, we see not the return of an American titan, but the tragi-comic emergence of what Hans Christian Andersen warned us about long ago, an emperor without clothes. On the 2nd of April, Trump announced a sweeping near-universal tariff regime, a 10% blanket tariff on all imports, supplemented by targeted levies as high as 46% on countries like Vietnam, 34% on China, 25% on Japan and South Korea, and the European Union faces a 20% hike, while the UK, curiously, is spared with only 10%, perhaps a token of favour in Starmer's ongoing negotiations with the White House. Of course, Britain has been infected by all this tariff imposition in the past simply by being part of Europe and by buying into the VAT myth. But Trump's approach isn't policy, it's a tantrum with a calculator. And the formula, if one can call it that, behind these tariffs is a back-of-the-envelope arithmetic based on trade deficits, as if trade balances were moral scorecards rather than the outcome of complex global supply chains. It's economically illiterate. But worse, it's economically dangerous. Capital Economics predicts these measures will push US inflation beyond 4% by the year's end. Interest rates will remain high, investment will stall, and the cost of living will bite harder for ordinary Americans. Already, steelmaker Cleveland Cliffs is laying off workers. The S&P 500 plunged. The dollar dipped. America's elective tariff rate is now the highest it's been in over a century, higher than under Smoot-Hawley, which helped cause the Great Depression. And what of the Republican Party itself, the party of free markets, once the guardians of trade liberalization has been hijacked by a mercantilist cult of personality? Congressional Republicans, many of whom privately admit that this is lunacy, are too frightened of Trump's wrath and his MAGA base to speak out. The ideological DNA of the GOP has been rewritten by a man who thinks trade is a zero-sum game and that economic self-sufficiency means becoming North Korea with bigger hotels. Nowhere is this madness more visible than in Trump's continued obsession with Greenland. Greenland, a sovereign part of the Kingdom of Denmark, inhabited by 56,000 people, none of whom asked to be annexed. Trump now refuses to rule out force, and Vice President, the gerbil J.D. Vance, has visited a US Space Force base on the island, and a White House delegation insists that only the US can defend Greenland's sovereignty, a sentence so Orwellian it would make NATO blush. The Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, has called this what it is, a threat to the post-war order, and the Greenlandic Prime Minister simply said, "We do not belong to others." And yet the fantasy endures, because Trump confuses domination with diplomacy, possession with protection, chaos with strength. His administrations say these measures, both tariffs and territorial ambitions, are about security and self-sufficiency, but really they're about attention. Like a child bored in the supermarket, Trump commands the spotlight by knocking over the cereal boxes. The question is not whether he will eventually grow up. The question is, can the rest of the world afford to indulge this level of immaturity for another 4 years? He is not a strategist. He is a disruptor, whose ignorance is matched only by his confidence. He boasts of fighting inflation while raising taxes on consumer goods. He dreams of industrial revival while crippling the global supply chains needed to achieve it. He styles himself a working-class hero while imposing consumption taxes that fall hardest on working-class families. And let's not forget, this is the man who believes a better wig or a hair freshener, a hair transplant, is a suitable stand-in for a brain. Eventually, this delusion will wear thin, not unlike the toupee. Even among his own supporters, Polling shows faith is faltering. Economic confidence is plummeting. It just hasn't yet plummeted behind the resolute desk. Voters who once chanted "drain the swamp" are starting to realise they've simply been sold another creature from it. But behind the curtain rises Donald Trump's final unmasking. That's a deeply confused metaphor, isn't it? Donald Trump's final unmasking is about to be launched on the world, and it may yet do grievous harm. He may yet do grievous harm. I don't know whether he's going to be exposed before all that harm occurs. Harm not just to the United States, but to the global economy, to international institutions, to alliances carefully stitched together over generations. The emperor has no clothes, but he has a Twitter account, a pen, a following, and he's been elected into the White House. And until many people in his party and the world are brave enough to say so, we may all be forced to live under his delusions.